Welcome to the Period Besties Podcast with Stasha and Katie. Think about it as chatting with your best friends about all the TMI stuff you've never talked about before with two period coaches who've been helping hormones collectively for over 20 years now. I'm Stasha.
And I'm Katie, and we're pulling back the curtain on what it's like in the world of menstrual coaching. From puberty to menopause and everything in between, we're here to show you how period coaching can save the day. We'll share practical tips and information you can put to immediate use to improve your hormones and happiness.
We're removing the mystery, ending the taboo, and shining a light on just how powerful period coaching can be.
So whether you need period coaching or are considering becoming a period coach yourself, these episodes are going to help you. We'll share stories, coach live on air, and bring smart, savvy guests to share their wisdom too. Let's start today's episode.
Goodness, so this episode on birthing, the post-birthing process with Lynn was just absolutely mind-blowing for me. So much of what she talked about, she touched on the physical aspects of it, the traumatic aspects of it, the healing aspects of it. It was just so fascinating. And I love her message of there's hope. There's things that can be done. You don't have to live with it. I just found it so inspiring.
I did too. And I really love that we talked about the trauma because this is definitely something that I've been working through. So many of my clients have been working through. Even if everything went quote unquote right as what you thought, there's still so much that you are processing. It happens so fast, that birthing process. Fast but slow, that your brain is trying to make sense of everything. But what I loved was like the tissue doesn't lie and really working through things that it might have occurred, might not have occurred the way that you wanted to, and really working that out of your body. What a beautiful message. And I just loved how she walked us through her process because I just really haven't heard it explained that way. And not many people do that work, which is so important and essential. So I loved it.
Yeah, I've only ever heard of the things that she's speaking about from either Indigenous women with the closing of the bone ceremonies and the wrapping ceremonies, or in somatic trauma healers. So it was so fascinating to me to see that she, as a practical PT, came to those same conclusions simply by listening. By really listening. And it's just something that I think as a coach, as a trainer of coaches, that listening is one of our key tools in our toolbox. And it was just incredible to me that she was able to put all of that together simply by really, truly tuning in and listening to her clients and how that came about. And it was so similar how I developed period coaching school as to how she developed her institute. It goes to show that we as women have been so abandoned that we just had to listen to each other out for ourselves and then decide, you know what, let me help others do it. And building our own communities, building our own studies, building our own research.
Definitely. And I think the message of this, so listen along, is what happens when you actually listen.
Yeah.
As a person listening to your body and then finding a practitioner that's going to listen to not what you're saying, but what your body is saying. And I think that's a beautiful message. So enjoy this episode. And as always, let us know if you have questions, share with everybody. And we can't wait for you to listen to this episode today.
Welcome to the Period Besties Podcast. Today, we have a fantastic guest with us, Lynn Schulte. We're very excited to speak with her. She has been doing this work for a long time and has such amazing amounts of wisdom that we're going to try and cram as much as we can into an hour. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I love any opportunity I can get to talk about what I know. So we need to educate moms. We need to educate women and help them understand what's going on in their bodies, especially after birth.
Yeah.
It's such a bummer. It's like the medical care. We do such a great job of keeping mom and baby alive for the most part. But we just really fail them in that postpartum period. Like all the focus just goes right toward the baby and is the baby okay? Is the baby okay? But the focus is not on the moms, and the mom's body, it just went through the most amazing experience and has stretched beyond its capacity sometimes. And moms are just left, you have any issues, you go to your doctor, it's like, "Oh, you just had a baby. What do you expect?" And I'm here to say that you don't need to expect and accept your body for the way it is. And especially the most common one is that leakage, right? That bladder leakage after having a baby. And you go see your provider and they're just like, "Oh, yeah, you just had a baby and you're just supposed to live with it." Thank you for having me on so we can tell everybody you do not need to live with that, everybody. It is very common, but it is not normal and it is treatable. So everything that I want to talk about today is something that you can treat.
Yeah.
You don't have to live with it.
That is definitely a big theme in this podcast is we are told we have to live with a lot of things, and very rarely is that true. Almost all the time, there's some sort of solution that can at least alleviate, if not completely eradicate the issues. So we're very excited to have you here. Now, obviously, you just told us a little bit about what you do. So how did you get into this postpartum birthing?
So I'm a pelvic health physical therapist, and I've been one for over 30 plus years, and I stopped counting at 30. That's enough. I was living in Seattle, and then I moved to Boulder, Colorado. And I had my practice in Seattle, and I was doing women's health and seeing everything like most women's health physical therapists or pelvic health physical therapists do. You see a little bit of everything throughout the cycle and throughout the woman's lifespan. When I moved to Boulder, Colorado in 2008, I started my practice only working with postpartum moms. And that's the only person I was seeing in my practice. And that allowed me to find the common patterns that I was seeing. Like women would lay down on my table and their pelvis would always rotate to the left. And I would just see it in every single client. And then I figured out what was going on, and I was able to release the sacrum goes into a certain pattern, and I was able to release that. And they're like, "Oh my God, my back pain is gone." And I've been seeing chiropractors and massage therapists for months. And in 5 minutes, you got my back pain gone? What'd you just do? And I was able to discover that the bones of the pelvis, they need to widen for a baby to come on out. And what's happening out there is that those bones don't always go back to their original position after birth. And nobody's looking for that. Nobody is addressing the bones of the pelvis and what happens to them during birth afterwards. And so I started addressing the bones and bringing them back to their original position. And moms would get off my table in one session and be completely out of pain. And in one session, their pelvic floor muscles are able to function so much better. And so by just seeing that one population for years, I really discovered all these similar patterns that happened in that postpartum body. And then I figured out how to release all those patterns. And I was really getting good results with my clients. So I started putting on YouTube all these patterns I was finding in the body. And I got invited to go over to Russia to teach. I got emails from women all over the world saying, "Oh my gosh, I have exactly what you're talking about. Do you know someone who can help me?" And I was like, "Not really, because this is what I discovered on my own. I didn't learn it from someone else." That's when I realized that I needed to help others know, other practitioners know about this. And so in 2016, I founded the Institute for Birth Healing. And I have been since traveling the world and teaching other body workers, anyone with a license to touch, how to work with the postpartum body, and then also how to prepare our pregnant body's clients for birth. Because another big piece of the puzzle that we're missing in pregnancy care is really evaluating the body prior to going into labor. Like I said, we do a great job of keeping mom and baby alive to that birth event, but we're not really assessing the body or the baby's position to see if that baby can come out. Can the body open up for the baby to come on out? And that's what we as pelvic health PTs can bring to the table for moms is really any mom, especially if you're pregnant again and you had a VBAC and you want a VBAC and you tried to go into labor and baby just didn't come out, please go get assessed by a pelvic health PT. Please go be assessed by someone who studied with me, who knows the pregnancy evaluation so that they can really assess and help baby get into the best position possible, help you to learn how to push effectively. Do you realize that when I work with people, we start on their back and their legs are bent up and I'm doing some intravaginal work. We just worked with glove fingers. We don't do a speculum or anything when we do intravaginal work. And when I ask someone laying on their back with their knees bent up, which is the very common pushing position in the hospitals, I ask them to push my fingers on out. Okay, here's where you're going to feel the baby's head. Now push my fingers on out. A lot of them are contracting. A lot of them are bearing down on their belly, but they're tightening their pelvic floor muscles. And the being on their back is the hardest position to push in. And so I get them on their side and then we practice in side lying and they start to get it. And then I get them up on hands and knees and they practice in hand knees and the majority of people get it in hands and knees or even tall kneeling. And then they really get it. Tall kneeling is just like how we need to be when we poop. And labor is a lot like pooping. That I just want women to understand that what you bring in your body to your birth impacts your birth. If you've had a fall on your tailbone, if you have tension in your pelvic floor muscles, if you've had an appendectomy, that is going to impact your baby's position in your belly. So the appendix is in that right lower quadrant of your body. If they take that out, it creates scar tissue and it pulls your uterus. That scar tissue inhibits the uterus from being in midline. So now it's pulled to the right. So babe's only on your right-hand side of your body. So that's something else that you need to understand is that where's your baby in your belly? Is it only inhabiting one side of your belly? That's telling me that you have uterine ligament restriction, that there's not enough space for your babe to get in whatever position it wants to get into to come on out. And we really want to make sure that baby is in a beautiful position with the head in the midline. Why are we going into labor with babies' heads heading into people's hips? It just doesn't make sense in my mind, but doctors don't know this. OBGYNs, they just don't know what they don't know. And some midwives, like I love Gail Tully of Spinning Babies, has done a beautiful job of getting the word out about positioning and what we can do to help reposition babies and spin them. And I love that title. But that's awesome information. But please, anybody who's pregnant listening into this, please go get assessed. Please go get your body and your pelvic floor muscles assessed. I call the pelvic floor muscles the stoplight for birth. That if we have red light tone in there, that baby is not coming out. You are going to need an epidural to try to bypass that tension in your pelvic floor muscles. But if it's too tight, baby might not come out. So we want to have green light tone in there, nice and springy, bouncy muscles that elongate as the baby comes on out. And then we need to understand, so after we get the baby out, your body has just gone through a tremendous change. And I talked about the bones not going back to their original position. I'm coining that the open birthing pattern of the pelvis. And unfortunately, unless a physical therapist has trained with me, a lot of them don't know what to look for. PTs, OT, pelvic health therapists, if they haven't trained with me, or even chiropractors, nobody knows to look for this in the body. And some of the signs that you know that your pelvis is still in that birthing pattern is that you don't like laying on a hard surface, that it hurts your sacrum. That means your sacrum is still lifted backwards from the way the baby came out. So if you're watching this on video, the sacrum needs to lift backwards. And the ischium, your two sit bones that you're sitting on, need to split apart for baby to come on out. If this is too far back, if your sacrum is too far back and you're laying on a hard surface, it's really going to be uncomfortable. So that's a sign that your sacrum is still stuck in flexion. And then if you're sitting and you feel a little uneven, or like your sit bones just don't feel the same as they did before, one could be more splayed out to the side than the other. And it depends on the position that your baby came out in. So if you're seeing a pelvic health physical therapist and you're postpartum and they didn't ask you what position you were in when the baby came out, they're missing a big piece of the puzzle. And they're not addressing your pelvic bones, because if you're laying on your left side as that baby comes out, your right side sit bone has to open up more because the left side can't. Okay. So there's mechanics of like in physical therapists, occupational therapists, we understand the mechanics of the bones in the pelvis. And we should be using that based on your experience of my number one question is what position were you in when the baby came out? Because then I can take into account if you were standing, but you had one leg bent up, that leg that was bent up, that side's going to be more out to the side. Okay. There's different influences, different pressures that get placed on the bony pelvis with the way the baby comes out based on your positioning. And so what happens when your bones are stuck in what I'm coining the open birthing pattern, your pelvic floor muscles attach to all those bones. So now they're on stretch. And then you have stretched out muscles that your bones also being in that open birthing pattern, it's more unstable. So your pelvic floor muscles are like trying to help keep you stable. So there's tension in there. And so if you go see a pelvic health physical therapist or occupational therapist and they release that muscle tension because that's all they're taught to do is, okay, it's tight, let's get it to release. Let's force it to release. Then if your pelvic pain gets worse, your pelvic muscles were trying to stabilize you. And they need to address bringing the bones back together again. So then they don't even need to work on the muscles most likely because they don't have a job to do anymore. And so that's why it's super important for us as therapists to really get to the root cause of why is that muscle tight in the first place. And if we know the orientation of the pelvic floor muscles and you know what muscle's tight, you know what bone is pulling on it, creating that tension. And so that's what I'm teaching. That's what I'm trying to get out into the world and letting moms know, letting PTs, OTs know that, hey guys, we need to be addressing these bones of the pelvis first before we go address the muscles. So some of the things that happens when we have that open birthing pattern and the muscles are on stretch is that you don't like having intercourse because you can't, insertion might be painful. If the muscles are on stretch, they can't open up anymore to allow the penis to come in. And so if we can bring those bones back together again, those muscles relax, and then we can have intercourse. So with painful intercourse, there's two types. We can have insertional pain and deep thrusting pain. And insertional pain is a pelvic floor muscle issue. There's too much tension in the pelvic floor muscles. We need to address that first, and then you'll be able to have intercourse, no problem. But the deep thrusting pain, that tells me that the cervix is not happy in there. So that vaginal vault is a tube, and at the end of the tube is the cervix. And that cervix needs to be a piñata in there. It needs to be able to move all around and move up and down and out of the way. And ideally, it's in the middle so that the penis can go any direction around it. But after birth, I find that cervix everywhere in that vaginal space. It can be off to the left, it can be off to the right, it can be tucked up, it can be poking into your bladder after birth. So then guess what? You have to pee all the time. You think you have to pee all the time. It's ugh. And then it can be tucked way back. So the cervix really needs to be addressed postpartum. And we get that cervix moving again, then that deep thrusting pain goes away. And the other thing that can cause that deep thrusting pain is C-section scar tissue. So if any of you guys have had a C-section, please know it is imperative that you massage your C-section scar and get the tissues moving, because scar tissue just forms every which way to try to heal the tissue. And it can prevent the bladder from expanding fully. So you may have the feeling you have to pee every 20, 30 minutes, and you just went. And that's because the bladder can't expand without hitting that scar tissue, which sends a signal to the brain like, oh, I got to pee. But you really don't. It's just that your bladder can't expand without that pressure. And there's stretch receptors in that in that bladder wall. And so if that stretch receptor gets activated, that's what's sending the signal to the brain that you have to pee. So you massage your C-section scar and that goes away. And then the C-section scar can inhibit the cervix from being able to get out of the way. So that's going to cause deep thrusting pain. And then the third thing C-section scars can cause is low back pain. So we got to, and a lot of times by the time these symptoms show up, it can be 10 to 15 years down the road and nobody's thinking C-section scar at that time. Okay. So I feel like I'm rambling on and I could keep going on.
I can definitely attest to all of that. I had twins. And so I just remember I worked with a pelvic floor physical therapist the whole time, honestly, and then saw her right at 6 weeks going back after postpartum. But basically, I didn't even realize I was waddling towards the end of my pregnancy. You know what I mean? And then after having babies, I was like, why are my feet? Because I could see my feet again. I'm like, why are my feet going out? Like I'm waddling. And I've been dealing with lower back pain and all of the things. And she massaged my scar like at that 6 weeks mark. I personally had a really hard time doing it myself.
Yes.
I think there was a lot of D
Yep.
associated with it. I also had my boys at the height of COVID. So there was a lot going
yes.
on with that.
Yes.
But I went every week and she massaged. We did a lot of cupping. And I tell all of my clients, no matter how they birth, that physical therapy, pelvic floor, PTOT is essential. And even my clients that are older and they're probably in their 50s, early 60s, who are now experiencing lots of back pain and they're told that they need back surgery. I was like, talk to me about your birthing process. Did you ever get physical therapy? They're like, no, because that wasn't necessary. I don't even know if it was a thing. Like, I would love to hear about when this became quote unquote.
Yeah. Gosh, I don't know how many years ago it's been, but Kathy Wallace founded like doing internal pelvic floor work for physical therapists. I want to say probably 40, 50 years ago. It's been a while, but man, it's taken a long time to get out into the world. I want to just say, like, when I started back in 2009, 10 is when I started my practice. And back then, there was nothing on the internet about postpartum healing. There was Julie Tupler had started a Tupler technique on healing diastasis. That was it. That was it. So in the last 14 years, the information online, thanks to social media, has exploded. So thank goodness that's happening. What we need to remember is once you are postpartum, you are always postpartum. It does not matter. I've worked with women in their 60s and their pelvic floor muscles are like, this one client was like cardboard. Like they just couldn't function. And our pelvic floor muscles are supposed to turn on and turn off like we open and close our hands. That's how easily they should be able to activate and relax. After birth, especially when they're in that splayed open position and they're being stretched, it takes effort and energy for them to, if you're efforting to get your pelvic floor muscles to contract, they're not happy. There's something going on in there. And so there's one client, she was in her 60s and she had a couple of kids. And I was just like, oh my gosh, to me, like when I felt into her pelvic floor muscles, they just felt like they were cardboard. And I never had that feeling before. These are cardboard. But I brought her bones back together. And then her muscles were no longer cardboard and they had that instantaneous contraction and relaxation. It was night and day in just one. I think it took me 2 sessions to realize what was going on. But once I realized it and I brought her bones back together, because that's the thing, if you're not looking for it, you're not looking for it. And so then they're just I'm talking about physical therapists, occupational therapists do intravaginal work. Their focus, their training was just on the muscles, like how to get the muscles. And so their focus, they're just hammering the muscles, trying to get them to either release or to try to activate better. But what I've discovered in my career is that when you address the bones first, when you address the bladder, so the bladder is another thing that kind of gets smushed off to the side as that baby's head comes through vaginally. And I usually find it mostly to the left-hand side. And so the bladder should sit right in the midline of your pelvic space, right behind your pubic bone. And internally, you can feel what's the space on one side compared to the other. And there's less space on one side. And when you help bring it back into the midline, then working to get the cervix moving and like a piñata in there is always my goal. Then the pelvic floor muscles can just activate so much easier on their own. And so there's very little work that you have to do when addressing the muscles when you do it in that order. And so I do teach an interventional protocol because I find that first, when you do this, you need to assess this, treat that, then do this. That by the time you get to the pelvic floor muscles, they're almost relaxed and there's less work to do on them. And so I just like what I teach in my classes and courses for internal pelvic health therapists is that we need to be respecting those tissues. You talked about it, Katie, about I couldn't touch my C-section scar. That is a sign of trauma. And
Oh, yeah.
the pelvic space goes through a lot of trauma, and birth can be very traumatic to the body. And that trauma gets held in the tissues. And that the tissues, to me, when there's trauma in there, it's like the tissues are holding their breath, like, and it hasn't exhaled. And you can learn to sense into that and feel for that. And there's a way to work with the body and help people to replay their births in a way that was more empowering, the way they wanted it to go. And you can feel the shifts in the tissue as they do that. And so that's another thing that I teach is we need to be respectful of these tissues, and we should never be causing pain as we do intravaginal work, because that's just traumatizing an already traumatized system. And unfortunately, that's just not how it's being taught in our school, people that are teaching other pelvic health courses. And we need to understand this. We need to know that birth can be traumatic. And I've had people come into my practice and they're like, no, my birth was great. No, it's fine. And then you get on the table and you start working with their tissues. And there's like, oh, yeah, I remember that now. Like there is some amnesia that happens, don't you think? Like after having a birth, it's great. Like afterwards, I remember saying, that was hell. That was hell. Never want to do it again. And then 6 months later, I'm like, oh, let's do it again. Like there is some amnesia that happens after birth. And so we just need to help understand that our body goes through so much and that birth can be traumatic. And sometimes there's trauma in the tissues. And that's why you don't want to touch your C-section scar. And that's why you don't want to have intercourse. That's why you can't connect to that pelvic space because it was too overwhelming to you. So you abandon that space. And it's super important for us to reconnect back in. Our pelvic space is our energetic home in our body. And we need to come back home and re-inhabit that pelvic space so that we can be in our power center, our truth center, our home. That's where we're meant to live from. We're not meant to live from our heads here, guys. That is just a third of the power in our body. We should be living from our heart space and our womb space and having all three balanced and on board. And that's an ideal way to be out in the world, to be a mother in this world, is to be connected to your pelvic space again. And a lot of times we get disconnected from that birth process.
How do you incorporate that healing aspect that I'm curious about that because I feel like it's one thing to talk about it, but it's a different, is it like Reiki? Like what is this healing process, energy shifting? Because it sounds really fascinating to me.
It is. I love it and I'm addicted to it. And so what it is, I always address the body physically and I'm looking for the patterns that I know that are there. And it's when the tissues won't release. It's when the tissues won't let go or when there's a stuckness that I'm feeling in the body. That's when I just get curious with it. And I get curious with, and when there is excessive pain in a scar tissue. So I just had a client who she had a really traumatic birth and she had a really bad tear on the right side of her vaginal tissues. And it was really painful for her. And so we had in her first session, we had cleared away the nurse, like, because the nurse was awful. And we're like, okay, so you can replay the birth in the way that you wanted it. And while someone is doing that, I'm monitoring the tissues. Because when the issues lie in the tissues, everybody, just remember that because we can do all the cognitive behavioral therapy and all the talk therapy that you want around a birth or around any trauma, around anything, but it's still going to be in your body. And that's why when people come in, and I'd say the pelvic floor muscles are like sponges and they just hold that emotion, they hold the trauma in those tissues. And that's why when a lot of people go to have intravaginal work, to have someone cry on your table is super, super common. And that's why I think it's a disservice for pelvic health or pelvic health therapists to not know how to address the emotions, know how to address and how to hold space for someone releasing and letting go of something that's being held in their tissues. And I'm listening to the tissues as they're replaying that story because I want to feel for the shift. I want to feel the tissue's reaction to what they're replaying because we can do it from a mind perspective and it's not going to affect the tissues. I want someone to be connected to that space and feeling what they're feeling in their body as they're processing or thinking about whatever it is that needs to be addressed. And so this one client had this tenderness on that right side, and we knew that the nurse was awful. So we just kicked her out of the room. And there was a shift and change. And she came back the next session, but she still had a lot of pain and wasn't really able to manipulate that tissue at all. And so I just dive in and get even more curious about it. And actually, then she went into what the nurse did to her. And I realized that, oh, it was still held in the tissues because as someone's talking, their words impact the tissue. And so you can feel there's either like there's an energy flow throughout our body, and there's a craniosacral energy flow and expansion and contraction of our cranial sacral system. There's also chi that flows through our body that acupuncturists are moving with needles, or we try to move through qigong or movement. You can tune in and feel that energy flow. And when someone's talking and the energy's flowing and all of a sudden it just stops, whatever they just said was significant to their body. And so you need to go explore that more. Or if the energy is stuck, for example, I had a back pain and I swear it was my psoas muscle. And I was teaching and I had a student who had taken my advanced trainings. And so she knew how to work with the body in this way. I go, Jenny, can you just release my psoas muscle? Cause it just hurt so bad and I can't stretch it. Nothing would touch it. And so I lay down on the table and she tunes in. She goes, yeah, Lynn, it's not your psoas muscle. And until she had her hands on my body, I couldn't feel how stuck my energy was going down my right leg. It was just stuck in my right side pelvis. And so I was like, oh, okay. So then she's like, what do you think it is? And I go, oh, it's that. And she's go deeper because it didn't change the energy it was still stuck. And so I went deeper and then I'm like, oh, I think it's this. And then the energy starts flowing and you're on the right path. So that's why the body tells you whether you're going down the right path or not. And so as I was working on this client that had this right side scar tissue pain, it was really intense. We actually had to replay and kick the nurse's energy out of the tissues because we had released it on one level, but we hadn't released it from the tissues. And once we released it from the tissues, then we were able to get in there and do some release work because it was less painful for them. And that's why I'm a huge fan. And what I teach is we should never, ever be creating pain when we're working on the body because pain is a sign the body's not liking it. So we shouldn't be doing that. And we need to get to the root cause. And once you get to the root cause of it and you know how to dialogue with the body and the tissues and understand how to feel for the releases in the tissues, that's where the gold is. And that's why the body cannot lie, but our mind can. And it's not lying. Our mind just there's several different paths it could be. And it's got to be this. And you go down that path, but nothing changes in the body and the tissues. So that's not it. And so that's why I love working at the body level. It's the bottom up versus the top down. We need to be addressing the body and those tissues at that level because you can tell when the tissues release, when they soften, when they let go, that you're on the right track. So does that
No, that's so beautiful. And I can totally, I had a mean nurse. So I'm like, oh, she's probably in my body still.
Yeah. Yeah. There's power in. I had this one client come to me and she told me the most horrific. Her birth was actually beautiful, but everything that happened to her afterwards was just trauma. And I was like, oh my gosh, listening to her story as a therapist, I was like, I have no idea what I'm supposed to do with her or how I'm supposed to help her, right? That was a lot. And so I just go and I listen to her body and I let the body guide me. And as I tuned into her body and listened to it, like I couldn't find anything in her tissues. In fact, the only thing that came up was something that happened to her in her teenage years. It wasn't anything to do with the birth. And so I was like, what did you do after that birth? And she said, I replayed the birth and the aftermath with my husband and my doula 3 times. And I talked about what I was feeling in the moment. And the feeling is the key. Because when we're being traumatized, the emotion and everything that's happened to us is way too much. It's like system overload, and we can't process what we're feeling in that moment. And our body takes 10 times slower to process than our mind. And so by replaying it and going over it and slowing it down and being able to articulate what she was feeling in the moment, that's what helped her to heal. That's what kept it from being stuck in her tissues. And so anyone can do that, but it's important to have that support of someone listening and someone who knows how to hold space for you to be able to process it, and for that person listening not to take it on and not to get affected and not to say things that trigger you even more. There's a whole skill in debriefing someone's birth, and it's important that you do not go from start to finish when you rebirth, when you're replaying a birth, because sometimes if you repeat your birth story from start to finish without processing it as you're telling it, you can actually re-traumatize yourself even more. Okay. So it's important. Like what I like to do is, so what part of your birth stands out the most for you? And let's address that part. What other part stands out? Let's look at it and deal with it in chunks versus going from start to finish. Now, I know in some debrief processes, they do go start to finish, but they're slowing it down and they're processing each step of the process or of the birth itself versus just letting you tell the story from start to finish. Okay.
It's something that comes up in coaching all the time, right? Because I'm certifying coaches, and a lot of them come from another coaching program where they've been told to pick at the scab, to get in there, to have their clients cry so that they can rebuild. And I just love how you were saying, the idea is not to create more trauma. The idea is not to create more pain.
Yeah.
And I honestly only really hear that in indigenous practices. So I've seen the closing the bones through indigenous practices for a long time. And that's very much that closing the bones and allowing the trauma and those kinds of things, like this whole ceremony and process. And it's very beautiful, honors all of that. So it's lovely to hear you finding these things out through just practice and putting it together. I feel like it was such the same path for me, where it was like there was nobody to tell me how to do any of this stuff, and I had to figure it out all on my own. And I just watched the clients that I had and put it all together and was like, okay, we need more support and help for this. So it was such a fast process. But I have to know, you started this a long time ago. Was that hard for you? Did you get backlash, or was it like fairly smooth sailing and people were like, oh my God, I need this so much?
It's been an interesting journey for me. I would say I'm still getting backlash from more the physical therapy field. There's a lot of them that just don't or can't grasp this idea of the open birthing pattern in the pelvis. Occupational therapists are way more on board. And because I think I should have been an OT. I am an OT at heart because I work and I see things in the way that they've been taught. And physical therapy come from it at a very physical capacity. And I did, when I started sharing all this stuff, I am unapologetic about talking about energy. I talk about the stuck energy in the body and how the tissues respond. And like, that's my love. That is my passion. And so that's how I came out of the gate talking about woo and all this stuff. And so I think that kind of turned a lot of PTs off from understanding these concepts, which is quite a shame because there's a lot of value in what I'm teaching and putting out into the world, but there's a lot of roadblocks that I'm feeling in the PT world. Yeah. However, the PTs that come and study with me, they start getting great results with their clients. So I'm going to let my work speak for itself. And it is a thing, and people are getting great results with learning from me and implementing what I'm teaching. And so I just keep holding on to that. And a client actually talked to me one day. I was telling her my frustration with this and trying to get it out into the world. Like, I just want I want all practitioners to understand, like, hey guys, we need to be addressing the bones in this way. And we're not looking for it, to start looking for it, because once you do, you start finding it in everybody. And she was like, Lynn, I don't think the world is ready to support moms in the way that they really need to be supported.
Yeah.
And I was like, ugh, you're so right. Like the medical system is not supporting moms in the way. Like, how in the world has the US have the highest mortality rate? We are a first world country.
Yeah.
That is just
It's
flipping
shameful.
astounding.
Yeah.
It's a shame.
It should be embarrassing. This country should be embarrassed by that, frankly. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so I just sit back with that and go, I have something the world's not ready to hear yet. And I'm not going to stop talking about it, because I have found in my own practice that it works better if I educate from the ground up. So educating moms, educating and getting the word out about this, that, hey, this is a thing. When I talk to other practitioners and I share about what the bones have to do for a baby to come out, the first response is, oh my gosh, that makes so much sense. But the PT world is not getting that same response. There's just like this blank look, and like they can't comprehend it yet. And one day it's going to change, and I'm just going to keep putting one foot in front of the other to try to get this work out. And I really appreciate you all having me on this podcast so that we can talk about these things, so that moms know they're not crazy, and that there's a reason they're having their back pain, their pelvic pain. And one thing I want to make people know, two things actually. One is that the body is amazing at adapting, and it adapts beautifully for pregnancy and birth. And a lot of times your body is doing what it can, probably more with increased tone in your pelvic floor muscles to hold you together. But you can be stuck in this open birthing pattern and not have any pain. Yet, when you get pregnant again, now you start having pelvic pain, and you didn't have it in your first pregnancy. That is a number one sign that your bones are still stuck in that open birthing pattern. And that if you can see someone who has trained with me, they can close your bones back up and that pelvic pain goes away in your pregnancy. And it just drives me crazy that I can't get more PTs to think about this, because they're looking at all the data, all the evidence. You guys, this is not evidence-based. It's evidence-based in the thousands of clients that I've worked in my practice and I've gotten excellent results with. It's not in the research. And that's why they're not looking at it, because it's not evidence in the research that this is a thing and that we should be looking for it. And so they're going to go down all these other paths of why you're having pelvic pain in pregnancy. But the number one question I ask my moms who are in subsequent pregnancy is, did you have this pelvic pain in your first pregnancy? And if the answer is no, then I know it's the birth process from that first birth that is causing you your pain. And when you address the bones, that pain goes away instantaneously. Okay? So please
Makes so
keep
much
that,
sense.
right?
It really does. So I feel like we could talk for 5 more hours. I love talking about this because I think it's so important, all of it, right? Especially even like when I went to see my doctor at the 6-week checkup, he was like, oh, you look great. What birth control do you want? And I was like, I look great. I can't even get up on this table. What are you talking about? You had to help lift me on this table.
Yeah.
Let's not even begin to think I'm having sex right now. Come on, dude. And I was like, I'm just going to tell you what my plan is. And I like laid out the plan that I had already created with my physical therapist. And he was like, okay, that sounds great. I was like, oh God, and I was like, okay, but I want them to be educated. I want every single woman to know that she doesn't have to have any postpartum leakage, pain, especially with a C-section. I think that's often really overlooked. So how do people find you? Tell us a little bit more about the amazing work that you do, how people can find you, so that we don't forget to share that.
I want to do that, but let me just share one more piece to the puzzle.
Please.
Because this is something that I just want people to have in their back of their minds, is that traumatic birth and, the C-section scar. If that C-section scar is painful, there's trauma stuck in those tissues. There's trauma from the event that you're dealing with. And so please, you need to go see a trauma therapist. You need to see someone who can help you with that birth process. And then the other thing is, if you've been traumatized, that sometimes the tissues, your uterus, doesn't realize that the birth is over. The uterus is stuck. It's frozen in time and space. And so the uterus can be holding that trauma. And what happens is like our body is living this timeline of our life. But when we have a trauma response in our body, our tissues get stuck in that moment of time and it doesn't move forward. And so if your uterus is still stuck in that moment of trauma from the first birth, it can be way harder for it to get pregnant again. And I had one client come to see me, and I saw her in January of 2023, and I saw her in January of 2022, and she had spent a year, 3 rounds of IVF in 2021 trying to get pregnant. I saw her in 2022 in January, and her uterus was so frozen. She had the trauma of her first birth that was stuck in there. And we had a beautiful release, and her uterus was like nice and happy. And I said, as she walked out, I'm like, good luck getting pregnant now. And she looked at me like I had 3 heads. Like she had just gone through 3 rounds of IVF and it didn't work. She got pregnant the next month. And then I saw her in January of 23 and she told me the story. And she was, I got pregnant right away. And she goes, and I owe it all to you because of that session. And I just want people to understand that this is a thing because doctors don't get this. They don't understand the impact of trauma and how that can incorporate things. So
yeah, no, I would also say that's true with miscarriages.
Yes.
100%. Yeah.
Yes. The other thing we need to realize with multiple miscarriages is that when you get pregnant again, by the time you get to 38, 39, 40 weeks, you really have to consciously let your baby go because unconsciously you are holding that baby in and willing it to stay alive the whole time. It's an unconscious, like holding up and in. And so I always assess people's root chakra energy, like that needs to flow down. That the root chakra from your perineum down to the earth needs to open up for baby to come on out. And if you've had multiple miscarriages, you are energetically holding that baby in unconsciously. So you consciously need to release and let that baby go. So yeah. Okay. So how to reach me, guys. Thank you for asking that, Katie. Like I said, we could talk. There's so many other fun stuff I could talk about, but I have 2 different websites. So I have my educational platform, which is instituteforbirthhealing.com. And that is for practitioners that want to learn more about this work. Please check that out. And that is also where I have my directory it's under other resources. So go to instituteforbirthhealing.com and in other resources, and there's a directory. So you can click on that and see if there's someone nearby you that is trained with me that can support you in your healing. And then my clinical practice is centerforbirthhealing.com. And so if anyone is interested, we can do distant healing sessions over the phone or over Zoom. We can help support you in that way. So if you want to reach out to me, please check out the centerforbirthhealing.com. And then I also have a YouTube channel that's under the Institute for Birth Healing. So YouTube channel is Institute for Birth Healing. And I have a ton of videos on there that can educate you for during pregnancy, afterwards. I do have a closing the bones exercise that is something that I wish it was just standard operating procedure after every birth. We just go in and have moms help bring their bones back together again. I just got someone commented in the video that they've been having back pain since their birth and they just did this with their husband and now their back pain's gone. So it's just a way to help speed up the healing process. So please, moms, check that out. You can do it at any time and still get good effect from it.
All right. We have a lightning round at the very end. So we have 12 questions that you just go with your intuition.
Okay. All right.
All right. Ready?
Yep.
What's your biggest craving?
Ice cream. Ice cream and love.
Oh, I love that. So do you eat ice cream and what flavor when you have this craving?
I love caramel. And yeah, but ice cream's a treat. I try not to eat it all the time.
Yeah. What's your favorite way to move?
Tennis. I love to play tennis and jog. Yeah. I've got to move my body. My gosh, if I'm on the computer too long, I've got to get up and move. Yeah, my body loves movement.
Same.
What's the number one self-care that you do when you feel stressed?
Taking a bath.
What's your music that you like to listen to when you're working? Obviously not with clients, but when you're working.
Actually, I don't listen to music when I'm working. I can't focus. I actually need peace and quiet. And when I'm working with my clients, I don't have any music going because there's very rarely do we have that silence. And I feel we need that silence to really connect into ourselves. So I'm a more quiet person when I'm working. Yeah, I don't have any music on.
Same, especially as a mom with toddlers, I need the quiet all the time.
Yes, and that's what I'm trying to provide for my moms. Let's decompress and let's get off. We are constantly bombarded, so let's stop.
You totally. What's your favorite country or place that you've visited?
Oh, I'd say Russia, believe it or not.
Beautiful
Yeah.
country. I was just in Poland last year. So it's just so gorgeous over there.
Yeah. Yeah. That was the first one that came to mind, but my second would be New Zealand. That's a land of adventure. So Russia for its uniqueness and its culture and the buildings and oh my goodness. Yeah. But New Zealand for the adventure.
I bet. Favorite holiday?
First that came to mind was Christmas. I just love the time. I love decorating my house and then just having that time with family. Yeah.
Is there a food that you dislike?
Probably not. I'm sure there is, but nothing. I love all food. I'm trying to think, but nothing is like there's no, oh my God, I hate that. But I know there is, but I can't, nothing's coming to mind right now. Yeah, interesting. Licorice. I don't like black licorice. That would be, and blue cheese. Those two. Okay, that's comes. Yeah.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Pumpkin spice, yay or nay?
Nay.
Do you cook?
No. I used to, and I don't mind it. I just don't like all the prep for it. And now it's just myself. So my boys have moved on and I'm not married, so I don't have to cook. And I've had a couple of roommates living with me and they cook. And so I will just eat whatever they cook. So I really have stopped cooking. And it's very nice.
I feel a little spoiled. It's lovely.
But now I'm on my own, so I'm gonna have to figure that out. But it's for me, I don't do elaborate stuff unless I have my boys over. I'll cook them meals when they come over, but I don't cook for myself. It's usually something quick.
Yeah, you totally get that. Where's your favorite place to work?
My favorite place to work is outside on my patio. Yeah, on a nice, beautiful day. I have a high table set that I sit at that's under shade, and then I have a little lounge chair area, so I love going out there when the sun's not beating on me. But yeah, being outside, being in that fresh air, I love that.
Love that. Final question. What's your ideal Friday night?
Oh, probably curling up on the couch and watching a movie. Yeah, with a good friend. So yeah, that would be it.
Yeah, right there with you.
Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much for coming on. For those listening, we'll have all those free gifts and links and whatnot in the show notes. So you'll have to go check all of Lynn's work out. Thank you so much for sharing this wisdom with us today. I feel like 5 hours from now, we could still be going and diving in even better and deeper, but we thank you for your time.
Thank you both for having me. Thank you, everybody, for listening in. And please, moms, know that you can heal, you can get better, and there is support for that. So please take care of yourself, prioritize yourself, and get the support that you need to feel better in your body.
Yes, here. Cheers to that. Thanks to everyone for listening, and we'll see everyone in the next episode. Bye for now. A big shout out and thank you to our sponsors for today's episode, Period Coaching School and Katie Bresek Wellness.
Thanks to you, our favorite bestie, for listening to the Period Besties Podcast, where no topic is TMI. And of course, share this episode with your besties.
Remember to leave us a 5-star review, nothing less than the best for us besties, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.
You can follow us on Instagram at Stasha Washburn and at Katie Bresek, or email us at periodbestiespodcast@gmail.com.
Check out more about us at katiebresek.com
and periodcoachingschool.com. And of course, check the show notes for free goodies and extras that support this episode.
We'll see you on the next episode.
Bye for now, besties.